Hello, welcome to the next A-level lesson from the conscientious biologist, Ben Gallagher. This one's the first in the playlist on the nervous system and nervous communication. And this one's largely an overview of everything that you should have covered at GCSE, though of course that might be up to 2 years ago now, depending on when you did it in your GCSE syllabus. This one's also got a few additional bits of information from the A-level syllabus, just to make sure you know everything the rest of the unit is based on before we get into the massive details. As I said, this is from the A-level syllabus, and please do subscribe to me on YouTube if you haven't done so already. And remember, you can now find me on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you. So let's start off by talking about internal communication systems in general. Now, this is, of course, an essential and necessary requirement for complex multicellular organisms. We need to be able to communicate with all the different parts of our body, and there has to be coordination between the different systems and organs in our body. That's essential if the organism as a whole is going to survive. Now, consider an organism as being very, very similar to a society. Okay, so a group of people that have to function together and be productive. Now, if you've got one person on their own, they have to do absolutely everything, but they don't have to communicate with anyone else. But it's very hard for them doing everything on their own. That single person would be like a unicellular organism. Now, as soon as you've got two people starting to form your community, they need to have some communication. Go way back thinking about sort of cavemen and stuff, or just if you were stuck on an island somewhere with no sort of resources, no shops, no housing or whatever. If there were two of you, then one of you could say, right, you start building a fire, I'm going to go and try and get water. And that person might say, actually, I've already got water, so can you do something else? How about you find some food? And you can start to share jobs, communicate, work out what's going on. If a third person and a fourth person come in, you've got to increase the communication to subdivide the jobs and make sure everyone's doing everything properly for the good of everybody. That's exactly how your body does it. But within society, of course, we have lots of things like this. So you've got phone lines going in over there very badly, but you get the idea from that picture that loads and loads of communication lines, wires coming in and out, trying to link everyone together. You've got things like the middle picture there, which is just a disastrously wired bank of servers in some big business. But you can see all the wires going everywhere, connecting it together so all of them can communicate. Now, the bottom one here is a very neatly wired system. It's the back of a large computer server. But you can see all the wires have been put along the lines, going to their key places, carrying information from one place to another. Now, that bottom one is actually far more similar to our own nervous system. So if I put up nervous system as the title up there and we look at it as an overview, you can see on that diagram the kind of yellowish lines going inside the body, just like the yellow and blue wires on the picture over at the bottom there. It's actually very well organized because your nervous system is your body's internal wiring system. It's delivering and acting, collecting, delivering and acting on information received from both inside and outside the body. So sometimes there's things going on inside your body that need to say, right, this bit here isn't doing its job, so it needs to send a signal to here so that can do this. But more often than not, it's information coming us from outside that we need to receive and send around and process. Now, I'm going to put up a picture now it's a little bit gruesome. So if you're at all squeamish, you might not want to look at this, because the picture I'm going to pull up above me here is an actual nervous system that's been removed from a human, see, with great care and delicacy to remove the entire nervous system from the body, from a dead body, obviously, and then it's been set out above. So I'm going to put that picture up now. If you don't want to see it, skip forward 20 or 30 seconds until we're past it. But if I put it up here, look, you can see the brain at the top, the eyes that's still there, but that's the key bit of your nervous system. You've got the spine coming through the middle of it then, and you've got all the nerves that then span out from that to go down your arms, your legs, around to your other organs. So we can start to look at the overall nervous system as two key parts. The central nervous system, which is your brain and your spine, they're at the center of your nervous system, kind of key processing center, and your spine does a lot of processing. But all the nerves that then come off that to go to your peripheries, your hands, your legs, or everything else, that's called the peripheral nervous system. So your overall nervous system inside you is your central nervous system connected to your peripheral nervous system. You can also further subdivide the overall nervous system by talking about the voluntary nervous system, so that's for stuff that you choose to do. And these two words that we're talking about in this box are more for the responsive side of your nervous system, what we call the motor side of your nervous system. So you can voluntarily do things, or they can be autonomic. Autonomic is kind of another version of automatic. They just happen without you thinking about it, so they're subconscious. Now, the main things that happen from the autonomic nervous system would be affecting the cardiac muscle, keeping your heart beating or speeding it up or slowing it down, and affecting the smooth muscle, which is the muscle you find all throughout your intestines and digestive tract, so to allow peristalsis. Now, if you remember that peristalsis is that muscular squeezing of everything through your guts. You don't need to sit there thinking, oh, I better push my food through, or I better keep my heart beating, but that is your nervous system telling those things to act. It's automatic, you don't think about it, it's subconscious, so that's part of your autonomic nervous system. So lots of overview here, lots of stuff to remember, but let's move on to the next slide where we start looking at nerve cells themselves. Now again, this is largely GCSE information here, but with a few new terms from A-level piled onto it. So let's talk about nerve cells. Really important to know that the name of a nerve cell is a neuron, but a neuron isn't a nerve. A nerve is a whole bundle of neurons. It's the equivalent, if you had one piece of string, that would be like a neuron. If you put loads and loads of pieces of string together and kind of twist them around and had it as more like a rope, that's a nerve. So a neuron is a single nerve cell, a nerve is a whole load of them. But if we look at neurons in terms of what they need to be able to do, they have to carry electrical impulses around the body. So they need to be really long because they've got to carry the messages all around the body. That could be from your big toe all the way up to your brain. That's a long distance. So we don't just want an ordinary sort of bog standard roundish looking animal cell here. So let's turn this into a neuron. If we get rid of the organelles that are within there, it's still not long, it's still round. So imagine if we kind of squash it down, squeeze it out and flatten it out. So this black line here on this is representing the membrane that's just been taken like that, and you've pulled it and stretched it and pulled it out. It'd be way longer than this. At this scale, at that thickness, the neuron that you're seeing on your screen would have to be 20 meters long at this scale, because they're so thin and so long. Okay, so they've got to be long. But the problem is, if I put the nucleus back there, you can see the nucleus in the middle. If you've got an electrical signal coming down here, it's going to zap the nucleus and cause problems. So we can't just have the nucleus sitting in the middle. So you need a bigger area to put it into. Now in this type of neuron, which is a motor neuron, you've got a big space at the end, which is called the cell body, and you can just put the nucleus in the middle of that. But by having those big spiky branches coming out as well, that means it can gather information from various points, but it can also send that message down the main long part of the neuron to the other end, which can also be branched to deliver the message to a wider area or to more places. So it's branched to gather information, but also to give it out. So the second key adaptation of neurons, as well as them being long, they need to be highly branched. The third thing that's really important is putting these all over it. Hopefully these look familiar from GCSE and you know what they're for. They're an insulatory layer. It's called the myelin sheath, and that stops the signal from escaping outwards. But it also allows the signal to travel much more quickly. We'll look at why it makes the signal go much more quickly in, I think it will be the third video in this playlist, which is something called saltatory conduction. But those individual cells have a name, those blue blobs. We'll get to those in a second. But if we label everything else on there, remember a neuron is still just a cell. So we've got cytoplasm, we've got membrane, we've got the nucleus. That bit at the end, as I said before, is the cell body. The long, thin part going into the cell body, or the shortest thin parts on this one, those are dendrites. If they're very long, they can be called a dendron. The part that comes out is called an axon, and the axon, we'll get to the axon branches at the end, because it's literally where the axon has branched out at the end. Now, if we look at those bits that I added that were creating the myelin sheath, the insulation, each one of those blobs on there is an individual cell, and they are called Schwann cells. Now, a Schwann cell is a type of glial cell. So your nervous system really is made up of neurons and glial cells, and there's lots of types of glial cell, but Schwann cell are the only ones that you really need to remember their name. But how a Schwann cell works is it's as if you've taken like a big ordinary cell, imagine it like a beach ball, but if you squash that cell, that beach ball type cell, really flat, so all you're left with is kind of the plastic coating that the beach ball's made of. All you've really got is 2 layers of membrane. That's what a flattened cell is. That wraps around the axon, so it creates an insulatory layer. So you're wrapping it in a couple of layers of membrane, basically. That's what the Schwann cells are for. As functional cells, they don't do a vast amount other than create that insulatory layer. But note, there's small gaps in between each one of the Schwann cells. Those are called nodes of Ranvier. Those are really, really important when we get to conducting a nervous signal, that saltatory conduction that I mentioned a few minutes ago. But for now, just make sure you know all those names. And remember, this is a motor neuron. Make sure you can label it. We're going to look at all 3 types of neuron next and just put them in sequence for a nervous pathway. I'm going to go quite quickly through this because you really should remember this from GCSE. If you don't, it's up to you to watch it again or pause it, but let's go quite quickly here. So if I put that motor neuron down here that we've just been looking at, but up here I'm going to put the other type of neuron, which is a sensory neuron. These are the ones that connect to your senses, hence sensory neuron. So these sensory neurons, you'll see they've got a little bit that sticks out on them into which we can put the nucleus. That's because they don't have this big blobby bit of the motor neuron here. So they need a bit that sticks out, but that bit that sticks out because it houses the nucleus, that's the cell body of a sensory neuron. And that's to keep the neuron safe, the nucleus safely out of the way. It still needs to be covered in Schwann cells because it still needs that same type of insulation. It's still got axon branches at the end so it can deliver its signal over a wider area. But over on the far end of the sensory neuron there, if you look at those sort of purple circles I've put on there, that would be a receptor organ of some kind. We'll look at receptors in the 4th video in this playlist. But let's say that's hooked up to something called a Pacinian corpuscle, which is what detects pressure in the skin. Okay, that's going to receive information from the external world. And that information from the external world we call a stimulus. So the stimulus could be touch, it could be light hitting your eye, it could be a sound happening, it doesn't matter. But the stimulus will go to the receptor. The signal will then travel from the receptor. It will create a signal at the start of the sensory neuron, and that signal will travel along the sensory neuron. But notice where I put those little flashes. They were only in the nodes of Ranvier. Now that's very important, but we'll get to that in video 3. Okay, we've now got the signal. It's reached the end of that axon branch. From there, it goes to the 3rd type of neuron, which can be found in the coordinator. The coordinator will be the central nervous system, be it either brain or spine, and the neurons in the coordinator are called relay neurons. You sometimes see these referred to as intermediate neurons as well, but relay neurons I prefer as the term, and that is an official term for them, because it's like in a relay race. If you've ever run in a relay race or seen them on the telly in the Olympics or whatever, a baton's passed to one person, they run to relay it to the next person. It's exactly what's happening here. It's picking up a signal from the sensory neuron and it's going to relay it down to the motor neuron. But because relay neurons are highly branched, they can collect information from lots of different sensory neurons and send it out to lots of different motor neurons. Hence why they're called coordinators, because they coordinate the information coming in with where they're going to send it out. Your brain is absolutely packed full of relay neurons processing all of the information that's coming to you. But if we look now, the signal is going to jump across, it's going to travel through the relay neuron, it's going to jump again to jump into the motor neuron that we looked at before. It's now going to travel down the motor neuron to the end where it's going to link up to an effector. And it's an effector that's going to cause the response, which is ultimately the whole point of being able to detect things around you so you can respond to them to benefit your survival, to run away from something, to go towards something, to escape danger, to go towards food. It doesn't matter. Survival is about responding to changes in your environment, and this is the pathway by which that happens. Okay, really, really important that you understand this as the basic message that goes around the nervous pathway, but it's relatively straightforward, I would hope. So if we're just taking all the information from that last slide and summarizing it more diagrammatically, I can put those really important 5 words in sequence. all nervous responses, everything you've ever done in your life would have followed this pathway. There will have been a stimulus picked up by a receptor that went to a coordinator, decided what to do to send it to an effector, so the effector could cause a response. We know where the neurons go, that the sensory neuron connects the receptor to the coordinator, that coordinators are made of relay neurons, and that the motor neuron carries the signal from the coordinator to the effector, so the effector can do something. So if we're just throwing some more information on that, and this next bit's largely primary school level stuff, but I'm always amazed how many A-level students go, oh, I hadn't really ever thought about that. But it's really vital stuff, but it's really straightforward. So think about the different stimuli you can respond to. These are the only things you're aware of about your environment. You're aware of light waves, so that's things that you can see, light waves bouncing off objects. You're aware of chemicals in the air or in things that you touch or whatever. You're aware of heat, you're aware of pressure, and you're aware of sound waves. That's it. That's how you understand what's going on with you. But they're picked up by your receptors, which are your ears, skin, tongue, nose, and eyes, your sense organs. If we pair these things up here, though, light waves obviously are detected by your eyes. That's how you see. Chemicals, though, are detected by both your nose and your tongue. By your nose, if they're airborne chemicals, they go into your nose. Receptor cells inside your nose, called olfactory cells, can detect, receive the information, detect what those are, send a signal to your brain to process it. But anything dissolved in water and food or whatever that goes onto your tongue hits your taste buds receptors. You're detecting chemicals as well. So smell and taste, basically the same thing. They're just detecting chemicals from your external environment. Heat and pressure, both picked up by your skin, sound waves by your ears. Just make sure you can match those up, but that's primary school level stuff. Your coordinator, we've already said, would be your central nervous system, which is your brain and your spine. And if you look on this picture, you can see that they're basically the same thing. You can see the brain there, and the spine is just like an extension of the brain that just goes down your back. So they work very much together as your central nervous system. But your brain, because it's so densely packed with relay neurons, is for complex voluntary processing, or thinking as we more commonly call it. And your spine is for rapid involuntary processing, or reflexes. Now, I'd hasten to add here, you can't really put the voluntary and autonomic nervous systems on top of those, because it's not that the brain does all the voluntary and the spine does all the autonomic, because there's some of the autonomic that's done by bits in the brain. It's a bit more complex than that. But it's certainly that your voluntary processing, your thinking that controls what you do, that's all voluntary. But not all reflexes and autonomic are the same thing. They're slightly different. Okay, but certainly your spine deals with all your reflexes. So if something's flying towards you and you blink your eyes, you don't think about it. It's a reflex. It's protective. Your pupils constrict in response to bright light. That's a reflex. You don't need to think about it. Your heart rate increases during exercise. That's instant, but that one is autonomic because that's controlled in response to things that are going on inside your body. The effectors, though, that will be affected by the coordinator to make a change will almost always be your muscles. And it's your muscles that you either voluntarily control, or they can be autonomically controlled if it's cardiac muscle or smooth muscle. The other type of effector is a gland, which may secrete hormones into your blood. But whether it's a muscle or a gland, you're going to end up at the bottom there having caused a response. Now, everything that you ever do uses this pathway to allow you to effectively interact with your environment, and that is essential for survival. If you can't respond to what's going on around you, then what's going on around you will kill you. You need to be able to process information and decide how you're going to act on it. So quite a lot of information thrown at you in this video, but all of it pretty straightforward. Almost all of it just GCSE recap, so it should be very, very straightforward. Go through, watch it again, take any screenshots of anything that you need that you're going to add to your notes, but it's really important you know everything from this video, because that's what we're going to build on to now put all the A-level detail on top of this. As I said at the start, please do like this video if you found it helpful. Do subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't done so already. It does really help me out. And you can find loads of additional useful information on both my Facebook and Instagram pages. Thank you. Good luck.